The rain hammered against the windshield in sheets, turning the industrial district into a blur of sodium lights and shadows. Lieutenant Sarah Collins tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the patrol unit crawled through the maze of warehouses and distribution centers that lined Atlanta's southern corridor. Beside her in the back compartment, K-9 Max shifted his weight, his dark eyes tracking movement through the rain-streaked windows. "Dispatch, Unit 79er en route to Sector 12, Sarah said into the radio, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her gut. ETA 3 minutes. The call had come in as a routine security check. Motion sensors triggered at a textile warehouse that had been vacant for 6 months. Probably kids looking for shelter from the storm, or copper thieves stripping wire from the walls. Nothing that required a K-9 unit. But Sarah never questioned deployment. 7 years with Max had taught her that routine calls sometimes hid the worst surprises. She turned onto Fulton Industrial Boulevard, the tires hissing through standing water. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete canyon, buildings rising 3 and 4 stories on either side, their loading docks dark and silent. Lightning flickered in the distance, briefly illuminating the Atlanta skyline to the north, a reminder that civilization existed somewhere beyond this industrial wasteland. Max's ears perked forward. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. The Belgian Malinois sat perfectly still, his posture radiating focused attention. Not the relaxed alertness of a dog on patrol, but something sharper, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. "What is it, boy?" she asked quietly. Max didn't respond, didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on something ahead, something Sarah couldn't yet see through the curtain of rain. She slowed the vehicle, scanning the street, empty loading docks, abandoned pallets, a rusted chain-link fence sagging under its own weight. Nothing unusual for this part of Atlanta, nothing that should trigger Max's instinct. Then she saw it. A white panel van parked in the shadow of a warehouse overhang 50 yards ahead. No company markings, no license plate visible from this angle. Windows tinted black. It sat perfectly still, engine off, rain streaming down its sides like tears. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her radio, then stopped. The van wasn't blocking traffic, wasn't obviously involved in criminal activity. Could be a contractor, a delivery driver waiting out the storm, someone who had every right to be there. But Max's body language said otherwise. She pulled the patrol unit to the curb 20 yards from the van, killed the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. Rain drummed on the roof. Water rushed through gutters. The van remained motionless, its dark windows reflecting nothing. Sarah activated her shoulder radio. "Dispatch, Unit 79er. I've got an unmarked white panel van, Fulton Industrial Boulevard near the 1600 block. Running a visual check before proceeding to the warehouse." "Copy, 79er. Advise when clear." She stepped out into the rain, feeling it soak through her uniform immediately. The cold water ran down her neck, plastering her hair to her scalp. She opened Max's compartment, and the dog leaped down to the pavement, shaking once before moving to heel position at her left side. Together, they approached the van. Max's gait had changed. His movements were measured, deliberate, each paw placement precise. Sarah recognized the shift. Her partner had locked onto something. Not the explosive, aggressive alert he'd show for drugs or weapons, but something else, something that troubled him on an instinctive level. 20 feet from the van, Max stopped. Sarah halted immediately, her hand dropping to her service weapon. "Max?" The dog stood frozen, one front paw raised slightly, his entire body rigid, his ears swiveled forward, then back, then forward again. His nostrils flared, processing information Sarah's human senses couldn't detect. Then he sat, hard, definitive. The passive alert that meant, something is wrong here, something you need to see. Sarah's pulse quickened. In 7 years, Max had never given a false alert, not once. When he sat like that, when his body language screamed danger without aggression, it meant they'd stumbled into something that defied normal categories. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch 7-9er, K-9 has alerted on the white van, requesting backup for vehicle inspection." "Copy 7-9er. Units 42 and 86 are 12 minutes out. 12 minutes, an eternity in tactical time." Sarah circled wide, approaching the van from the driver's side, keeping Max close. Rain pounded the metal roof, creating a deafening percussion that masked any sounds from inside. She reached the driver's window and cupped her hands around her eyes, peering through the tinted glass. Empty, both front seats vacant. She moved along the side of the van, checking for signs of forced entry, recent damage, anything that might explain Max's alert. The vehicle looked clean, well-maintained, maybe 2 years old. No dents, no scratches, no identifying features of any kind. Perfectly anonymous. At the rear doors, Sarah paused. Max had followed her, maintaining his distance but keeping the van in his sight line. His body remained tense, coiled. She tried the door handle, locked. "Atlanta PD," she called out, her voice barely audible over the rain. "If anyone's inside this vehicle, identify yourself now." No response. Sarah pulled her flashlight and shone it through the small window in the rear door. The beam cut through darkness, revealing... She froze. The interior of the van was filled with equipment, not construction tools or delivery supplies, but electronics. Sleek black cases stacked 3 high. Laptops mounted on custom brackets. A communications array that looked like it belonged in a government surveillance vehicle. Cables snaking between components, all feeding into a central hub bristling with antennas. And on the laptop screens, still illuminated, still active, she could see images of the Atlanta Police Department headquarters, multiple angles, different floors, the parking garage, the evidence room entrance, live feeds, cycling every few seconds, showing empty corridors and security checkpoints in perfect digital clarity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She reached for her radio, then stopped. Something in her gut, the same instinct that Max possessed in abundance, screamed at her to be careful, to think before she spoke, to consider who might be listening on the other end of that radio call. She stepped back from the van, her mind racing. This wasn't random, this was targeted surveillance, professional-grade equipment aimed directly at her own department. Someone with resources, with knowledge, with access to frequencies and security protocols. Someone inside. Lightning flashed, turning the industrial district into a snapshot of black and white. In that brief illumination, Sarah saw Max watching her. The dog's eyes held a question, waiting for her command, trusting her to make the right decision with the information he'd provided. She pulled out her phone, switched it to camera mode, and began documenting everything. Photos of the van's exterior, the license plate, partially obscured but readable, the equipment visible through the window. She worked quickly, professionally, knowing that backup would arrive soon. And this scene would become official, recorded, processed through channels she was suddenly very unsure about. When she finished, Sarah retreated to her patrol unit with Max. They sat in the dry warmth of the vehicle, rain streaming down the windows, surrounded by the smell of wet dog and gun oil. Sarah stared at the white van, watching water cascade off its roof, and felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of the world. 7 years of partnership had taught her to trust Max completely. When he alerted, there was danger. When he froze, there was something wrong on a level beyond obvious threat. He had frozen at this van, and now Sarah understood why. Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Backup arriving. 2 patrol units pulled up behind her, officers emerging into the rain with flashlights and cautious body language. Sarah recognized them. Officers Martinez and Chen from the downtown precinct, solid cops with good instincts. She stepped out to brief them, choosing her words carefully. K-9 alerted on the white van. There's surveillance equipment inside, multiple cameras aimed at headquarters. I've documented everything, but I think we need to escalate this." Martinez approached the van, shining his light through the windows. His expression hardened. "Jesus, who called this in?" "It was incidental," Sarah said. "We were responding to a security check at the warehouse. Max caught the scent." Chen was already on his radio, calling for a supervisor and a tech team. Sarah listened to him relay information, watched the machinery of official response kick into gear, and felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. Someone had placed this van here. Someone with knowledge of patrol routes and timing. Someone who had access to equipment that cost more than most cops made in a year. Someone who was watching the watchers. 15 minutes later, the scene had transformed into a controlled investigation zone. Yellow tape cordoned off a 50-foot perimeter. A mobile command unit had arrived, along with Sergeant Davidson from Major Crimes and 2 technicians from the Electronic Surveillance Unit. Sarah stood with Max near her patrol unit, watching techs photograph the van from every angle before attempting entry. Davidson approached, his grey hair plastered to his skull by rain, his expression grim. "Collins," he said, "walk me through it." She did, keeping her report factual and precise. The routine patrol, Max's alert, the discovery of equipment, the live feeds showing Atlanta PD headquarters. Davidson listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring at the white van like it was a coiled snake. "The brass is going to lose their minds over this," he finally said. "Someone's been surveilling our own building, and we have no idea for how long." "The equipment looked active," Sarah offered. "Feeds were live when I looked through the window, which means whoever set this up might be watching right now." Davidson pulled out his radio. "I'm ordering a full sweep of headquarters. Every office, every closet, every goddamn air duct. If they've got eyes outside, they might have ears inside." He walked away, already barking orders into his radio. Sarah watched him go, then looked down at Max. The dog sat calmly now, the immediate threat identified and contained. But his eyes tracked every person moving around the scene, every vehicle that passed on the street, maintaining vigilance even as official authority took control. Smart boy, always watching. The techs finally breached the van's rear doors. Sarah couldn't see inside from her position, but she watched their body language, the sudden stillness, the urgent conversation, the way one of them immediately pulled out a phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, a black SUV arrived. No markings, no lights. 2 men in suits emerged, flashed credentials to Davidson, and entered the van. Federal agents, Sarah guessed, FBI or maybe Homeland Security. The scene had just escalated beyond departmental control. Davidson returned to Sarah, his face pale beneath the streetlights. "Collins, I need you to write up everything in detail. Every observation, every action, every word exchanged. The feds are taking lead on this, but they want our documentation before they move the van." "What did they find?" Sarah asked. Davidson hesitated, glancing at Max, then back to her. "More than surveillance. Communications intercepts, encrypted files, access codes to systems that shouldn't be accessible from outside. Someone's been running a full-spectrum intelligence operation against Atlanta PD." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not just watching, listening, accessing, penetrating the department's digital security like it was made of tissue paper. "How long?" she asked quietly. "They don't know yet. Could be weeks, could be months." Davidson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Could be years." Sarah felt Max lean against her leg, offering silent support. She reached down, resting her hand on his head, drawing strength from the solid warmth of her partner. Someone inside the department had been compromised, or someone inside was dirty. Either way, the institution she'd sworn to serve and protect had been violated from within, and nobody knew how deep the infection ran. Thunder rolled across the sky, a low rumble that shook the pavement beneath her boots. Sarah looked at the white van, at the federal agents moving through it with practiced efficiency, at the growing crowd of officers and supervisors gathering at the perimeter. Max had frozen at this van. In that moment of perfect instinct, before politics and procedures and official investigations kicked in, he had identified a threat that none of them could see. And Sarah realized, standing in the rain with water running down her face like tears, that this was only the beginning. Whatever they'd stumbled into tonight, whatever corruption or conspiracy lay hidden in the heart of Atlanta PD, Max had just torn open the first small hole in a wall of secrets. The question now was simple and terrifying. How far did those secrets go, and who would try to stop them from finding out? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken before backup arrived. Clear images of equipment, license plates, visible screens, evidence that existed outside official channels, outside the reach of whoever might want to sanitize this scene. Insurance or ammunition, time would tell which. Sarah looked down at Max, meeting his dark, intelligent eyes. "Good boy," she said softly. "Such a good boy." The dog's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement. Then his attention returned to the scene, watching, waiting, protecting, always protecting, even when the threat came from within. The fluorescent lights in the Atlanta PD briefing room buzzed like angry hornets, casting harsh white light over the assembled officers. Sarah sat near the back, Max lying quietly at her feet, both of them watching Chief Martin Hayes pace before the projection screen. 48 hours had passed since the discovery of the surveillance van, and the department had transformed into something unrecognizable. Hayes clicked the remote, and an image filled the screen. The white van, doors open, equipment visible. As most of you know by now, Lieutenant Collins and K-9 Max discovered a sophisticated surveillance operation targeting this department. The FBI has taken lead on the investigation, but we're cooperating fully. Sarah studied Hayes' face. 52 years old, silver hair cut military short, a jaw that could have been carved from granite. 28 years on the force, the last 6 as chief. The man who'd promoted her to lieutenant, who'd personally approved Max's honorary rank after they'd stopped an armed robbery that left 3 officers wounded. A mentor. A legend. So why did her stomach twist every time he spoke? "The good news," Hayes continued, "is that preliminary analysis shows the surveillance was external. No indication of internal compromise. The bad news is, we don't know who's behind it, or what their objective was." Officer Martinez raised his hand. "Chief, what about the encrypted files, the communications intercepts?" Hayes' expression didn't change. "FBI is working on decryption. Until they break those files, we're operating on assumptions." He clicked to the next slide, a grainy photo of a man in a baseball cap, face partially obscured. This individual was captured on a traffic camera 3 blocks from the van's location, approximately 30 minutes before Lieutenant Collins arrived on scene. "If anyone recognizes him, report to Sergeant Davidson immediately." Sarah leaned forward, studying the image. Something about the figure's posture, the way he carried himself, triggered recognition. Not a face she knew, but a bearing she'd seen before. Military training, maybe, or law enforcement. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering security protocol changes, increased surveillance awareness, mandatory password resets. Standard response to a security breach. Nothing unusual, except Max's reaction. The dog had been calm throughout the briefing, but now his ears twitched. Sarah glanced down and saw him watching someone across the room. Detective Paul Brennan from Vice, a 15-year veteran with a solid reputation and 3 commendations for bravery. Brennan sat perfectly still, taking notes, looking like every other cop in the room. But Max's attention remained fixed on him, with that same quality of focus he'd shown at the van. Not aggressive, not alarmed, just aware. The briefing ended. Officers filed out, conversations buzzing about the surveillance, about security, about who might want to spy on Atlanta PD. Sarah waited until the room emptied, then approached Hayes. "Chief, can I have a moment?" Hayes looked up from gathering his papers, and something flickered across his face. Concern, caution. It vanished before Sarah could identify it. "Of course, Lieutenant. What's on your mind?" "The FBI, have they shared any preliminary findings? Anything about the equipment's origin, or—" "It's classified," Hayes interrupted, his tone professional but firm. "I know you made the discovery, Collins, but this has moved beyond departmental jurisdiction. The feds will keep us informed on a need-to-know basis." "With respect, Chief, Max and I are still patrol officers. If there's a threat to our people, we need to understand what we're facing." Hayes studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "The best thing you can do is return to regular duty. Let the investigators investigate. That's not a criticism of your work. You and Max did exactly what you should have done. But now it's time to step back and let the system work." Sarah felt Max shift at her feet. The dog had moved to a position between her and Hayes, not threatening, just present, inserted into the space like a physical buffer. "Understood, Chief," Sarah said carefully. "We'll return to patrol." "Good." Hayes's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "And Sarah, be careful out there. Whoever set up that surveillance might not appreciate being discovered. Watch your back." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. A warning? A threat? Sarah couldn't tell. She left the briefing room with Max, walked through corridors that suddenly felt too narrow, too watched. Officers she'd known for years nodded greetings, but their eyes held questions. Some looked at her with respect. She'd uncovered a major security breach. Others looked at her with something else. Suspicion? Resentment? In the locker room, Sarah changed into her patrol uniform, methodical and precise. Max waited patiently, his presence a constant reminder that some things remained reliable even when everything else shifted beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed. Text message from Martinez. "Need to talk. Not here. Piedmont Park. Bench near the dog park. 30 minutes. Sarah stared at the message, then deleted it. If Martinez wanted to talk away from the department, something was wrong. Very wrong. 28 minutes later, Sarah and Max arrived at Piedmont Park. The afternoon sun broke through scattered clouds, turning the grass brilliant green. Dog owners threw tennis balls while their pets bounded across open fields. Normal, safe, a world away from fluorescent lights and suspicious glances. Martinez sat on a bench overlooking the dog park, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a Braves cap, sunglasses. He looked like any other Atlanta resident enjoying the afternoon, but Sarah recognized the tension in his shoulders. She sat beside him, Max settling at her feet. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, dogs barked and children laughed, and the city breathed like nothing was wrong. "They're scrubbing the case," Martinez said quietly, his eyes on the dogs playing. "The surveillance van. FBI took everything yesterday, the equipment, the van itself, all our preliminary reports. Then this morning, I went to pull up my notes from the scene, and they're gone from the system." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Gone how?" "Deleted. Completely wiped. Like they never existed." Martinez turned to look at her, and Sarah saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I still had handwritten notes in my patrol book. I went to scan them as backup, and Captain Morrison told me to destroy them. Direct order. Said the FBI requested all documentation be purged for security reasons." "That's not standard procedure." "No, it's not," Martinez pulled off his sunglasses, rubbing his eyes. "Collins, I've been a cop for 12 years. I've worked with feds before. This isn't normal interagency cooperation. This is burial." Max's ears perked up. Sarah followed his gaze and saw a man in running clothes jogging past, one hand on his phone, glancing in their direction. Could be nothing. Could be someone listening. "Why tell me?" Sarah asked. "Because Max found that van. Because you documented everything before the scene became official. And because—" Martinez hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because 3 days ago, I arrested a dealer named Marcus Webb. Small-time player, but he had product from a major shipment we seized 6 months ago. Product that should have been destroyed." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Where did he get it?" "He wouldn't say, but when I started asking questions, when I tried to trace the evidence chain back to the seizure, I got shut down. Captain Morrison again. Told me Webb was released on a technicality. Case closed. Move on." "Released?" "Walked out 8 hours after booking. No charges filed." Martinez put his sunglasses back on. "I checked the evidence room logs. That seizure, it's listed as destroyed 6 months ago. But Webb was selling it on the streets last week. Someone's running product out of our own lockup, Collins, and someone just buried a surveillance operation that might have been documenting it." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. The surveillance van watching Atlanta PD, evidence disappearing, dealers walking free, orders to destroy documentation. A system protecting itself from exposure. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Anything concrete?" "Just my word and a closed case file. Not enough." Martinez stood, stretching like he'd finished a pleasant conversation about nothing important. "But you have photos from before the scene went official. You have documentation that exists outside department servers. If something's rotten, Collins, you might be the only one who can prove it." He walked away, just another jogger continuing his route through the park. Sarah sat motionless, Max pressed against her leg, while the world continued spinning around them like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She pulled out her phone, opened the encrypted photo folder where she'd stored images from the van. They were still there, clear shots of equipment, screens, license plates, evidence that someone, somewhere, wanted erased. Max whined softly, sensing her distress. Sarah ran her hand over his head, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We're in trouble, boy. Big trouble." The dog licked her hand once, then returned his attention to the park. Always watching, always protecting. Sarah made a decision. She opened a secure email app, one not connected to department servers, and forwarded the photos to 3 separate accounts. Personal addresses she trusted, people outside law enforcement who would keep them safe if something happened to her. Insurance or evidence, time would tell. That night, Sarah worked her regular patrol shift. The streets of Atlanta rolled past her window in familiar patterns, homeless encampments under overpasses, late-night diners bright against the darkness, convenience stores with bars on the windows. Max rode in his compartment, alert but calm, while Sarah's mind churned through everything she'd learned. The radio crackled. "All units, we have a 1091 at 847 Memorial Drive. Possible break-in at a commercial property. Unit 79er, you're closest." Sarah keyed her radio. "Unit 79er responding." She flipped on the lights and headed toward Memorial Drive, Max already shifting in his compartment, reading her body language and preparing for action. A routine call, probably nothing. But after the last 48 hours, Sarah trusted nothing. The address was a pawn shop, its windows dark, steel security gate pulled down and locked. Sarah approached cautiously, Max at heel, scanning for signs of forced entry. Nothing obvious. The gate was secure, the door behind it intact. Then Max froze. Not at the pawn shop. At the alley beside it, a narrow gap between buildings that disappeared into shadow. The dog's entire body went rigid. That same quality of absolute attention he'd shown at the surveillance van. Sarah drew her weapon, aiming her flashlight into the alley. "Atlanta PD! Show yourself!" Nothing moved. The alley was empty, cluttered with dumpsters and debris, but containing no visible threat. Max didn't move. Sarah advanced slowly, sweeping the alley with her flashlight. 20 feet in, she found it, a cardboard box, crushed and torn, lying beside a dumpster. Inside the box, barely visible in the flashlight beam, she saw electronics, not civilian gear, not street-level equipment, a radio transceiver, encrypted, commercial grade, and beside it, a notebook with handwritten notes, addresses, times, badge numbers, including hers. Sarah's hand trembled as she photographed the items with her phone. Someone had been surveilling her, tracking her movements, recording her patrol patterns. Footsteps echoed behind her. Sarah spun, weapon raised, and found herself facing Sergeant Davidson. He stood at the alley entrance, backlit by streetlights, his expression invisible in shadow. "Collins," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "How did you know I was here?" Sarah asked, keeping her weapon steady. "I didn't. I was following up on some things." Davidson stepped into the alley and Sarah saw his face clearly for the first time. He looked exhausted, years older than he'd been 2 days ago. "Put the gun down, Lieutenant. I'm not your enemy." "Then who is?" Davidson glanced at the box, at the equipment Sarah had discovered, and his expression hardened. "Everyone. No one. I don't know anymore." He moved closer, keeping his hands visible. "But I know this. Someone's been running an operation inside Atlanta PD for a long time. That surveillance van you found, it wasn't watching us from outside. It was backup, insurance. The real operation is internal." "How do you know?" "Because I've been investigating it for 3 months. Quietly, carefully. And every time I get close to something solid, evidence disappears. Witnesses change stories. Files get corrupted." Davidson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That equipment you found tonight? Someone dumped it here after you discovered the van. They're cleaning house, Collins, erasing connections." Max growled softly, a low rumble that raised the hair on Sarah's neck. The dog was watching something beyond Davidson, deeper in the alley, where shadows pooled thick and impenetrable. Davidson heard it too. He turned slowly, hand moving to his weapon. "We need to leave, now." They backed out of the alley together, weapons drawn, while Max maintained position between them and whatever had triggered his warning. Sarah's patrol unit sat 30 feet away, a beacon of safety in the darkness. They reached the vehicle without incident. Sarah secured Max in his compartment while Davidson scanned the street with the practiced eye of a 20-year veteran. "Listen carefully," Davidson said, his voice urgent. "Don't trust anyone at the department. Don't file reports. Don't use department communication channels. Someone high up is protecting this operation, and they've got eyes everywhere. Then what do I do? What you've been doing. Document everything. Keep evidence outside official channels. And watch your back, because whoever's behind this just realized you're dangerous." Davidson pulled out a business card, scrawled a number on the back. "This is a federal prosecutor I trust. If something happens to me, call her. Tell her everything." He walked away quickly, disappearing into the night like a ghost. Sarah stood beside her patrol unit, card in hand, while reality crystallized into terrifying clarity. She was alone, isolated in an institution she'd devoted her life to serving, surrounded by colleagues who might be corrupt, indifferent, or compromised, watched by enemies she couldn't identify, targeted by a conspiracy she didn't understand. Sarah looked at Max through the vehicle's window. The dog watched her steadily, brown eyes reflecting streetlight, absolutely unwavering in his loyalty. Not alone. Never alone. She got in the vehicle, started the engine, and drove into the Atlanta night. Behind her, the alley held its secrets. Ahead, The city spread like a puzzle, with pieces deliberately misplaced, patterns hidden beneath layers of misdirection and lies. But Max had frozen at that van. Max had alerted in the alley. Max knew something was wrong, even when humans couldn't see it. And Sarah was beginning to understand that her partner's instincts might be the only thing keeping her alive. The radio crackled with routine calls, domestic disputes, traffic accidents, noise complaints, the machinery of law enforcement grinding forward, oblivious or indifferent to the rot beneath its surface. Sarah drove past headquarters, its windows bright against the darkness, and wondered how many people inside wore corruption like a second uniform. How many had sold their oath for money or power, or simply the path of least resistance? Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Last warning." Sarah deleted the message and kept driving. Max shifted in his compartment, settling down for the long night ahead, but remaining alert, always alert, monitoring the world through senses humans could barely imagine. Tomorrow she'd write her reports, using language carefully crafted to reveal nothing while documenting everything. Tomorrow she'd smile at colleagues while wondering who wanted her silenced. Tomorrow she'd pretend the system worked while knowing it was fundamentally broken. But tonight, driving through Atlanta with her partner beside her and evidence hidden in encrypted files, Sarah Collins made herself a promise. Whoever was dirty, whoever was protecting them, whoever had turned her department into a vehicle for corruption, she would burn them all down, even if it cost everything. The evidence room at Atlanta PD headquarters occupied the basement level, a maze of steel shelving and concrete walls that smelled of dust and decades-old paperwork. Sarah stood before the access terminal at 3 a.m, Max sitting patiently beside her, while the building above them slept under skeleton crew staffing. She'd waited 5 days for this opportunity, 5 days of careful observation, noting shift rotations and security patterns, 5 days of acting normal while her world fractured around her. 5 days of watching Chief Hayes smile at morning briefings while her gut screamed that something fundamental had broken in the chain of command. Sarah swiped her access card. The terminal beeped and the steel door unlocked with a heavy click. She glanced down at Max. The dog's ears were forward, alert but not alarmed. Good. If someone waited inside, Max would know. They entered the evidence room together. Motion-activated lights flickered on in sections as they moved deeper into the facility, creating pools of harsh illumination separated by shadows. Rows of metal shelving stretched toward the ceiling, each labeled with case numbers and dates, the organized chaos of a decade's worth of criminal investigations. Sarah pulled out her phone, opening the Notes app where she'd compiled information over the past 5 days. The case number Martinez had mentioned, the drug seizure where product had somehow returned to the streets. Case number 2024, DR 8847. She moved through the aisles, scanning labels, while Max padded silently beside her. Section D, row 12, shelf 4. The evidence box sat exactly where the system said it should be. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and lifted it down, setting it on a processing table under bright LED lights. The seal was intact, tamper-evident tape showing no signs of compromise. According to the log, this box had been sealed 8 months ago and never reopened. She photographed the seal from multiple angles, then carefully cut it open. The box was empty, not completely empty. Paperwork remained. Evidence tags and chain of custody forms, all properly filled out and signed. But the actual evidence, 3 kilos of fentanyl-laced heroin worth $500,000 on the street, was gone, vanished. While the paperwork claimed it sat secured in this box, maintained under proper protocol, Sarah's hands shook as she photographed everything: the empty box, the intact seal, the documentation that proved nothing except someone had gotten very good at making evidence disappear while leaving perfect paper trails. Max's ears swiveled. Sarah froze, listening. Footsteps, above them, moving across the floor of the main building with purposeful cadence. Someone else was here, in a building that should be nearly empty at 3 a.m. Sarah quickly resealed the box, returned it to its shelf, and moved toward a position with clear sightlines to the entrance. Max pressed against her leg, body tense but controlled. The dog had shifted into tactical mode, silent, focused, ready. The footsteps grew louder, descending stairs, approaching the evidence room. The access terminal beeped. The steel door opened. Chief Hayes entered. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, and carried a small duffel bag. For a moment he didn't see Sarah standing in the shadows between shelving units. She watched him move with familiar confidence toward Section F, toward the high-value evidence lockers that required supervisor-level access. Max's body vibrated with tension, not aggressive, not fearful, but absolutely certain that something was wrong with this picture. Hayes swiped his access card at an evidence locker. The lock disengaged with a metallic click. He opened the door, pulled out a sealed evidence bag, and began transferring its contents, brick-shaped packages wrapped in plastic, into his duffel. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She was witnessing it, actually seeing the theft happen in real time. Her mentor, her chief, the man who'd sworn to uphold the law, casually looting the evidence room like it was his personal storage facility. She pulled out her phone, switched to video mode, and began recording. The angle was poor, the lighting creating shadows that obscured details, but it captured Hayes's face, his actions, the evidence locker number. Proof. Finally, undeniable proof. Hayes zipped the duffel bag closed and turned. His eyes met Sarah's across 20 feet of evidence room. Time crystallized. Sarah saw surprise flash across his face, followed by calculation, then something cold and predatory that she'd never seen in him before. The mask dropped, and underneath was a man she didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Collins," Hayes said, his voice perfectly calm. "This is unexpected." "Chief." Sarah kept her phone recording, held at waist level, lens aimed at Hayes and his duffel bag full of stolen evidence. "Working late?" "I could ask you the same question." Hayes set the bag down slowly, his movements careful, non-threatening. "What brings you to the evidence room at 3 a.m? "Following up on a case. What brings you?" Hayes smiled. It was a terrible thing to witness, a smile without warmth, without humanity, the expression of a predator acknowledging its prey. "You know, Sarah, I've always admired your dedication. 7 years with Max, excellent arrest record, natural investigator. When I promoted you to lieutenant, people said you were too young. I defended you." "I remember." "Do you also remember who approved Max's honorary rank? Who fought the brass to keep you two partnered after that incident with Internal Affairs? Who's protected your career at every step?" Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. "What's in the bag, Chief?" "The wrong question." Hayes took a step forward. Max's low growl rumbled through the evidence room like distant thunder. Hayes stopped, eyeing the dog with respect. "The right question is, what are you going to do with whatever you think you saw here tonight?" "I'm going to report it." "To whom?" Hayes's smile widened. "The FBI agents who investigated the surveillance van. They reported to me, Sarah, the whole operation, every finding filtered through my office. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. You were behind the surveillance. I was behind stopping the surveillance. Someone was watching us, documenting operations, building a case, a very dangerous someone with federal connections and unlimited patience. That van you found, that was their mistake. They got sloppy, and you and Max gave me the perfect justification to bring in the FBI and shut the whole thing down." Sarah's mind raced, trying to process implications that kept multiplying like fractures in ice. The evidence purge, the deleted files, that was you covering tracks. That was me protecting this department from a witch hunt that would have destroyed careers, collapsed prosecutions, and turned Atlanta PD into a national scandal. Hayes's tone shifted, becoming almost paternal. Sarah, I know how this looks. I know what you think you're seeing, but there's context you don't understand, complexities that don't fit into simple categories of right and wrong. Stealing evidence isn't complex, it's theft. Is it? Hayes gestured at the shelves surrounding them. This evidence came from dealers who terrorize our communities. It came from cartels that poison our children. If some of it gets redirected to controlled stings, to operations that actually stop crime instead of just documenting it, you're selling it. Sarah's voice hardened. You're not running stings. You're running product back onto the streets. Hayes's expression flickered. Careful, Lieutenant. Accusations like that have consequences. So does theft. So does corruption. So does betraying everything you swore to uphold. I swore to protect Atlanta. Hayes's voice rose, genuine passion bleeding through his calculated demeanor. I've given 28 years to this city. I've watched politicians cut our budgets while demanding we perform miracles. I've seen good cops destroyed by stupid rules designed by people who've never walked a beat. Sometimes, Sarah, protecting what matters requires flexibility. Flexibility? Sarah's laugh was bitter. That's what you're calling it. What would you call it? What would you do with unlimited evidence, limited budget, and a city that expects you to win an unwinnable war? Hayes moved closer, ignoring Max's warning growl. I've used recovered assets to fund operations that saved lives. I've leveraged relationships with criminals to stop worse criminals. I've made compromises that let me protect the people who matter, while getting rich in the process. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Hayes's mask cracked completely, revealing fury underneath. You don't know anything about my finances. You don't know about my choices or my sacrifices. I know you're stealing evidence at 3 a.m. with a duffel bag. Sarah held up her phone. And I have video proof. Hayes stared at the device, and something shifted in his expression. Calculation replaced anger. That phone is department property. Any recordings made during official duty belong to Atlanta PD, which means they belong to me. I'm on personal time. This is my phone, my recording. Is it? Hayes pulled out his own phone. I could call Internal Affairs right now. Report that I caught you in the evidence room at an unauthorized hour, behaving suspiciously. Who do you think they'd believe? A decorated chief with 28 years of service, or a lieutenant who's been exhibiting paranoid behavior since she stumbled onto that surveillance van? Sarah felt the trap closing. Hayes had resources, authority, credibility. She had a video that could be dismissed, questioned, buried under procedure and politics. Max pressed harder against her leg, sensing her distress. You're going to walk away, Hayes continued quietly. You're going to delete that video. You're going to forget this conversation, and in return, I'll forget I found you here. Your career continues. Max stays as your partner. Everything goes back to normal. Normal. Sarah's voice was hollow. While you keep stealing, keep corrupting, keep betraying everything we're supposed to be. While I keep protecting Atlanta in ways that naive idealists like you can't understand. Hayes picked up his duffel bag. Make your choice, Lieutenant. Delete the video or destroy your career. You have 10 seconds. Sarah looked down at Max. The dog watched Hayes with absolute focus, reading micro-expressions and body language, processing information through instincts that evolution had honed across millennia. And in Max's steady gaze, Sarah saw something that had been there all along, but which she'd never fully understood until this moment. Max had frozen at that surveillance van, not because it was dangerous, but because it was wrong. Wrong in a way that transcended simple threat assessment. A corruption of order, of trust, of the fundamental structures that held society together. Max had been trying to tell her that the threat came from within. "I'm not deleting the video," Sarah said quietly. Hayes's expression hardened. "Then you're finished. By tomorrow morning, you'll be under investigation. By next week, you'll be suspended. By next month, you'll be lucky if you're not facing criminal charges for evidence tampering. Maybe, but at least I won't be a thief wearing a badge. No, you'll just be unemployed and powerless while the thieves keep operating." Hayes moved toward the door, then paused. "I really did admire you, Sarah. I thought you had the potential to see beyond simplistic morality into the grey spaces where real police work happens. I was wrong." He left. The steel door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin ceiling. Sarah stood alone in the evidence room. Not alone. Max was there, always there, and felt the weight of what she'd just witnessed settle onto her shoulders like stone. She'd backed Hayes into a corner. He would come after her now with everything he had: institutional authority, political connections, the ability to manipulate systems she barely understood. She pulled out her phone, opened her secure email app, and uploaded the video to 3 separate cloud accounts with instructions to release it publicly if she didn't check in every 48 hours. Dead man's switch. Insurance against being silenced. Then Sarah did something that would have seemed insane 5 days ago. She accessed the evidence room database and began searching systematically through records, looking for patterns. Cases where evidence had been logged as destroyed but might have actually been stolen. Cases where chain of custody showed irregularities. Cases that connected to Hayes's access history. Max watched her work, patient and unwavering. At 4:30 a.m., Sarah found it. Not just one pattern, but 3. Different types of evidence. Drugs, cash, weapons, all moving through falsified destruction protocols, all passing through evidence lockers that required supervisor access. All signed off by Chief Martin Hayes and a rotating cast of officers whose names kept appearing. Detective Paul Brennan, Sergeant Lisa Morrison, Officer James Kincaid, Captain Frank Delacroix. 5 names, 5 officers at different ranks, different units, different specializations. A network, a conspiracy, operating for at least 3 years based on the earliest documented irregularity. Sarah photographed every record, every discrepancy, every signature. Her phone's storage filled with evidence that would destroy careers, collapse prosecutions, and shake Atlanta PD to its foundation. The morning shift started arriving at 6 a.m. Sarah and Max left through the basement exit, emerging into dawn light that felt surreal after hours in fluorescent-lit shadows. The city was waking up. Traffic building on the interstates, early commuters rushing toward jobs, a new day beginning as if everything were normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Sarah drove to a 24-hour diner near the airport, ordered coffee she didn't drink, and compiled her evidence into a coherent file. Names, dates, case numbers, photos, video, a roadmap of corruption detailed enough that even the most willfully blind investigator couldn't ignore it. Then she called the number Sergeant Davidson had given her, the federal prosecutor, a woman named Elena Martinez, who specialized in law enforcement corruption. The phone rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. "Martinez. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Collins, Atlanta PD. I have evidence of systematic corruption involving senior department officials. I need to know if I'm about to commit career suicide or actually accomplish something." There was a pause. Then, "Tell me everything." Sarah did. She spoke for 40 minutes, laying out the surveillance van, the deleted files, the missing evidence, Hayes in the evidence room, the network of officers, the falsified records, everything. When she finished, Martinez was silent for a long moment. Then, Lieutenant Collins, what you've described is a RICO case, organized criminal activity under color of authority. If your evidence is solid, this could bring down not just individuals, but the entire command structure. How long would an investigation take? Months, maybe a year. We'd need warrants. We'd need to build parallel cases. We'd need to protect you from retaliation. I don't have months. Sarah looked at Max, sitting patiently in the booth beside her. Chief Hayes knows I have the video. He'll move against me immediately. Then you need to decide right now. Do you want justice or do you want safety? Because you can't have both. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of 7 years with Max. 7 years of believing in the system, in the mission, in the idea that good cops could make a difference. 7 years that had led to this moment, sitting in a diner at dawn with evidence of corruption so deep it might be terminal. I want justice, she said. Then stay somewhere safe. Don't go home. Don't go to the department. I'll have agents pick you up within 2 hours and we'll put you in protective custody while we verify your evidence. Martinez's voice softened slightly. Lieutenant, you're doing the right thing. It's going to be hard, but you're doing the right thing. Sarah ended the call and looked at Max. The dog's brown eyes held steady, unwavering, absolutely certain of one thing. Wherever Sarah went, whatever dangers she faced, he would be there. We just declared war on our own department, Sarah told him quietly, on people who have resources, authority, and absolutely no morality. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Max's tail wagged once. His message was clear. Then we'd better get started. Sarah paid for coffee she hadn't touched and walked out into Atlanta's morning light with her partner beside her. Somewhere in the city, Chief Hayes was preparing his counterattack. Somewhere, 4 other dirty cops were receiving warnings. Somewhere, a conspiracy was circling its wagons against exposure. But Sarah had something they didn't. She had evidence. She had determination. And she had Max, a partner whose instincts had never failed, whose loyalty couldn't be bought, whose sense of right and wrong was as absolute as physics. She'd frozen at that surveillance van, and everything had changed. Now there was no going back, only forward, into whatever darkness waited. Together. The safe house sat in a quiet suburb 30 miles outside Atlanta, indistinguishable from every other ranch-style home on the tree-lined street. Sarah stood at the window, watching dawn give way to morning, while Max patrolled the perimeter of the living room with methodical precision. 2 FBI agents occupied the kitchen, their presence a reminder that she'd crossed a line from which there was no return. Her phone had been ringing for 3 hours. 17 missed calls from the department, 12 text messages, 6 voicemails. She hadn't answered any of them. Special Agent Elena Martinez entered from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the bearing of someone who'd prosecuted enough dirty cops to recognize the patterns. Your chief is looking for you. He's filed a missing persons report, claimed you didn't show up for shift and aren't responding to calls. He's establishing a narrative, Sarah said, accepting the coffee, making it look like I've had some kind of breakdown. That's exactly what he's doing. Martinez sat on the sofa, gesturing for Sarah to join her. He's also initiated an internal investigation into your conduct, allegations of evidence tampering, unauthorized access to secured areas, erratic behavior. Sarah's laugh was hollow. Of course he has. The good news is your evidence is solid. The video of Hayes in the evidence room, the documentation of falsified destruction records, the pattern analysis, it's enough for warrants. Martinez pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents. We're moving fast on this. By tonight, we'll have surveillance on all 5 subjects. By tomorrow, we'll start executing search warrants on their homes, their vehicles, their financial records. How long before they realize what's happening? They already know something's wrong. You disappeared. Hayes is smart enough to understand what that means. Martinez met Sarah's eyes. Which is why you can't leave this house. The moment you surface, they'll grab you. Protective custody arrest, psychiatric evaluation, anything to discredit you before your evidence goes public. Max padded over and laid his head on Sarah's lap. She ran her fingers through his fur, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. What about Max? He's technically department property. K-9 officers are usually allowed to take their partners home. As far as anyone knows, Max is with you wherever you are. We'll deal with custody issues after we make arrests. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time a text from a number she didn't recognize. Sarah, it's Davidson. We need to talk. Hayes knows everything. You're in danger. She showed Martinez the message. The prosecutor studied it, her expression unreadable. Could be legitimate. Could be a trap. They know you trust Davidson. He gave me your number. He's been investigating this corruption for months. Or he's part of it and was establishing credibility. Sarah, in cases like this, everyone's suspect until proven otherwise. Don't trust anyone from your department. Not yet. The words stung, but Sarah knew Martinez was right. She'd already discovered that her mentor was a thief, that her department was rotten from within. How many other officers she'd trusted were compromised? How many were protecting Hayes because they were dirty themselves? Max's ears perked up. He moved to the window, body tense, staring at something outside. Sarah joined him, scanning the street. A dark sedan had pulled up 3 houses down, engine running, windows tinted. Martinez, Sarah said quietly. The prosecutor was already moving, hand going to her weapon. She keyed her radio. Agents, we have a possible situation. Dark sedan, 3 houses east, license plate. She rattled off numbers while pulling Sarah away from the window. The sedan sat motionless for 30 seconds. Then it pulled away, disappearing around a corner. One of the FBI agents entered from the kitchen. Running the plates now. Could be nothing. Or they're probing our security, Martinez said. Collins, you and Max stay away from windows. If Hayes is as connected as we think, he might have people checking safe house addresses. The next 3 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah tried to rest, but every sound made her jump. Every car that passed on the street outside might be Hayes's people, searching for her, ready to silence her before she could testify. Max remained vigilant, reading her anxiety and responding with his own heightened awareness. At noon, Martinez's phone rang. She answered, listened, her expression darkening. When? How bad? Understood. She ended the call and turned to Sarah. Sergeant Davidson was found dead an hour ago. Single gunshot wound to the head in his home. Atlanta PD is calling it suicide. Sarah felt the floor drop beneath her feet. No! Davidson was investigating Hayes. He was a threat to a criminal organization with badges and guns. Martinez's voice was hard. This is what I meant about danger. They're cleaning house, eliminating anyone who knows too much or might cooperate with federal investigation. They killed him. Sarah's hands shook. A 20-year veteran, a good cop. They murdered him and staged it as suicide. We can't prove that yet, but yes, that's almost certainly what happened. Martinez moved closer, her tone gentle but firm. Sarah, listen to me. This is bigger than we thought. More dangerous. These people will kill to protect themselves. You need to understand what you're up against. Max pressed against Sarah's legs, offering silent support. She buried her fingers in his fur, fighting back tears of rage and grief. Davidson had tried to help her, had given her Martinez's number, had been investigating the same corruption, and now he was dead. His death staged to look self-inflicted, another cop broken by the job. I want to testify, Sarah said. I want to testify before a grand jury, get indictments, put them all in prison where they can't hurt anyone else. That will take weeks. We need to build an airtight case. Davidson didn't have weeks. How many other good cops are they going to kill while we're building our case? Sarah stood, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. There has to be something we can do now. Some way to expose them before they eliminate everyone who knows the truth. Martinez considered this, then pulled out her phone. There might be. If we can get one of the 5 to flip, offer immunity in exchange for testimony against Hayes. Break the conspiracy from inside. Who would flip? Detective Paul Brennan. Martinez pulled up a file on her tablet. 15 years on the force. Clean record until 3 years ago when the corruption started. He's the youngest of the 5, least invested in the operation. If we can get to him, offer him a deal before Hayes realizes we're targeting him specifically. Hayes already knows I'm missing. He'll warn everyone in the network to lawyer up and stay quiet. Not if we move fast, not if we grab Brennan before Hayes can reach him. Martinez made a decision, pulling out her radio. I'm calling my field team. We'll pick up Brennan for questioning within the hour, separate him from the others, and make him an offer he can't refuse. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text. This one from Hayes himself. Sarah, whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. We can fix this. Call me. She showed Martinez. The prosecutor smiled grimly. He's scared. Good. Scared people make mistakes. The afternoon bled into evening. Sarah watched from the safe house window as the sun set over suburban Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the city, FBI agents were executing their operation, grabbing Brennan, applying pressure, trying to crack the conspiracy before it could fully entrench itself. Somewhere Chief Hayes was preparing his defense, marshalling resources, building a counter-narrative that would paint Sarah as unstable, her evidence as fabricated, her accusations as the paranoid fantasies of someone who'd cracked under pressure. Somewhere, Davidson's body was being processed as a suicide, his investigation dying with him, his family wondering what had driven him to such despair. Max whined softly, sensing Sarah's distress. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. I'm sorry, boy. I'm sorry I dragged you into this mess. The dog licked her face once, his message clear. We're partners. We face everything together. Martinez's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted from concentration to satisfaction. Brennan's in custody. He's asking for a deal. Says he'll tell us everything about Hayes's operation. Relief flooded through Sarah like a breaking fever. He's flipping. He's terrified. Apparently Hayes called him 20 minutes before we arrived, told him to run, that everything was compromised. Brennan panicked and called his wife, and we intercepted the call. He knows Hayes will kill him if he stays loyal, so he's choosing survival. Martinez grabbed her jacket. I need to go downtown for the interview. You stay here with the protective detail. This could break the whole case open. She left. The safe house fell silent, except for the quiet conversation of FBI agents in the kitchen. Sarah sat on the sofa with Max, waiting while the clock on the wall ticked away minutes that felt like hours. At 9 p.m., her phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. From Chief Hayes. Sarah stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Every instinct screamed to ignore it. But another part of her wanted to hear his voice, to understand how someone she'd admired could have become this corrupted. She answered. Chief. Sarah. Hayes's voice was calm, measured, the tone he used during hostage negotiations. I know you're with the FBI. I know you've been feeding them information. I know you think you're doing the right thing. I am doing the right thing. No, you're destroying careers of good cops who made hard choices in impossible situations. You're collapsing cases that protect our city. You're turning Atlanta PD into a national embarrassment that will take decades to recover from. Hayes paused. Brennan is lying to save himself. Whatever he's telling the feds, it's exaggerated, distorted, designed to minimize his own culpability. I saw you stealing evidence. I have video. You have video of me securing evidence for a classified operation that you weren't cleared to know about. Context matters, Sarah. The FBI is using you. They don't care about truth. They care about headlines and conviction rates. Sarah felt her resolve wavering. Hayes sounded so reasonable, so certain, so much like the mentor she'd trusted for 7 years. You killed Davidson. Davidson killed himself. He was under investigation for falsifying evidence, and he couldn't face the consequences. I tried to help him, tried to get him counseling, but he made his choice. Hayes's voice softened. Sarah, I know you're scared. I know you feel alone, but you don't have to be. Come in, talk to me. Let's resolve this before it destroys everything we've built, Max growled, low and threatening. The dog was staring at Sarah's phone like it was a snake, sensing danger in Hayes's words, even though he couldn't understand them. And suddenly, Sarah saw it clearly. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the way Hayes was trying to make her doubt her own eyes, her own evidence, her own moral clarity. This was how corruption survived, not through force, but through making good people question whether anything was truly wrong. I'm testifying against you, Sarah said quietly. I'm going to tell a grand jury everything I saw, everything I documented, every crime you committed. And when you're in prison, I'm going to sleep better knowing Atlanta is a little bit cleaner. Hayes was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, the reasonable tone was gone. You've made a terrible mistake, Lieutenant. The FBI can't protect you forever. Safe houses have addresses. Protective details change shifts. Accidents happen. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. You've declared war on people who have resources you can't imagine and connections that run deeper than some federal prosecutor's jurisdiction. We will protect ourselves by any means necessary. The line went dead. Sarah sat in silence, phone still pressed to her ear, while Hayes's words echoed in her mind. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. He would come for her, and he would use every tool at his disposal, legal and illegal, official and criminal. Max pressed closer, his presence a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. She had her partner. She had the truth. She had evidence that would withstand any amount of spin or manipulation. But Hayes had an army of corrupt cops, institutional authority, and nothing left to lose. Martinez returned at midnight, exhausted but energized. Brennan gave us everything: bank accounts, meeting locations, coded communication protocols, evidence of bribes paid to informants and judges. We have enough for RICO charges against all 5 subjects. The U.S. attorney is convening a grand jury tomorrow morning. Hayes called me, Sarah said. He threatened me, said accidents happen to people in protective custody. Martinez's expression hardened. Then we move faster. We'll have warrants executed by dawn, arrests by noon. Once Hayes is in federal custody, he can't hurt you. Unless he's not working alone, unless there are other officers we don't know about, other members of the conspiracy who can act while he's in jail. The prosecutor had no answer for that, because they both knew it was true. Corruption, this deep, this systematic, couldn't involve just 5 people. There were others, officers who looked the other way, who falsified minor documents, who took small bribes. A network of compromise that made the entire department complicit to varying degrees. Sarah looked at Max, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in the dog's eyes. They'd been awake for nearly 20 hours, running on adrenaline and coffee, holding together through sheer will. Get some sleep, Martinez said gently. Both of you. Tomorrow's going to be intense, and you need to be sharp. Sarah tried. She lay on the safe house's guest bed with Max curled beside her, listening to the quiet sounds of FBI agents on watch, and attempted to shut down her racing mind. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Davidson's face, saw Hayes stealing evidence, saw the white surveillance van that had started everything, saw the moment Max had frozen, that perfect instant of instinct that had revealed a truth she could never unknow. At 4 a.m., Sarah gave up on sleep. She sat in the living room with Max, watching the window lighten with approaching dawn, and made herself a promise. No matter what it cost, no matter how dangerous it became, she would see this through. For Davidson, for every honest cop whose career had been destroyed by Hayes's corruption, for the city that deserved better than officers who wore badges while betraying everything they represented. Max rested his head on her lap, and Sarah felt the weight of absolute loyalty. This dog would follow her into any danger, trust her completely, never question or waver. She owed him the same level of commitment to truth, to justice, to doing the right thing, even when the system itself was broken. Outside, Atlanta began waking up. Traffic sounds filtered through the quiet suburban street. Another day starting, full of people who trusted that the police would protect them, that the system worked, that good would triumph. Sarah knew better now, knew that good only triumphed when people were willing to sacrifice everything to make it happen. When they refused to be intimidated, refused to be silenced, refused to let corruption hide behind badges and authority. Hayes thought he could scare her into submission, thought she would break under pressure, doubt herself, retreat into comfortable lies. He had no idea how wrong he was, because Sarah Collins had a partner who never lied, never compromised, never stopped trusting his instincts, and Max's instincts said, fight. So they would. The Atlanta PD headquarters conference room held 40 people, but it felt suffocating. Sarah stood at the back with Max, watching FBI agents position themselves at exits, while federal prosecutors arranged folders on the main table. Through the glass walls, she could see officers gathering in the hallway, some curious, some hostile, all sensing that something fundamental was about to break. Chief Hayes sat at the head of the table, flanked by his attorney and the union representative. He looked calm, presidential almost, like a man attending a routine administrative meeting, rather than the moment his career and freedom would end. When his eyes met Sarah's across the room, he smiled, a slight knowing curve of lips that said, "You think you've won. You have no idea what's coming." Special Agent Martinez stood, commanding immediate attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. This is a joint FBI and U.S. Attorney briefing regarding an ongoing investigation into corruption within the Atlanta Police Department." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Hayes remained motionless, his smile unchanging. Martinez clicked a remote, and the projection screen lit up with a familiar image. The white surveillance van, doors open, equipment visible. 12 days ago, Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max discovered this vehicle during a routine patrol. What began as a simple security check evolved into evidence of systematic corruption, involving theft of evidence, falsification of records, and organized criminal activity under color of authority. More images appeared. Evidence room photos, falsified destruction logs, bank records showing unexplained deposits, the careful documentation Sarah had compiled over sleepless nights and dangerous investigations. "Chief Martin Hayes," Martinez continued, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you are hereby notified that a grand jury has returned indictments charging you with racketeering, theft of government property, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. You have the right to remain silent." Hayes stood smoothly, raising one hand. "Agent Martinez, before you continue, I think everyone here should know something important about Lieutenant Collins." The room fell silent. Sarah felt Max tense beside her, the dog sensing danger in ways humans couldn't articulate. "Sarah has been under psychiatric evaluation for the past 6 months. Hayes said calmly. "Stress-related paranoia, difficulty distinguishing reality from conspiracy theories." Her therapist has documented concerning behavior, including obsessive focus on colleagues, unfounded accusations, and increasingly erratic judgment calls in the field. Sarah's blood ran cold. That's a lie. Is it? Hayes pulled a document from his attorney's folder. This is a report from Dr. Kenneth Marsh, department psychologist, detailing his concerns about your mental state. He recommended you be removed from active duty pending further evaluation. I resisted that recommendation because I believed in you, Sarah. I thought you could work through it. Martinez stepped forward. Chief Hayes, we have testimony from Detective Brennan that directly contradicts Detective Brennan, who is currently facing 23 criminal charges and will say anything to reduce his sentence. Hayes' smile widened. Agent Martinez, I respect the FBI's mandate, but before you destroy careers based on the word of a desperate criminal and a mentally unstable officer, perhaps you should review the complete psychological profile. He slid the document across the table. Martinez picked it up, scanning quickly, and Sarah saw her expression flicker with uncertainty. This is fabricated, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. I've never been to a department psychologist. That signature isn't mine. The signature is Dr. Marsh's, not yours. He's been treating you confidentially, as required by medical privacy laws. Hayes turned to address the room. I know this is difficult. Sarah is a good officer who has served Atlanta with distinction, but sometimes the job breaks people. Sometimes dedicated cops develop paranoid delusions about the very institution they've sworn to protect. Sarah felt the narrative slipping away from her, felt Hayes constructing an alternative reality with the skill of someone who'd been manipulating systems for years. Around the room, officers were exchanging glances, not hostile but concerned, pitying, looking at her like she was a wounded colleague rather than a whistleblower. Then Max moved. The dog walked forward through the conference room with purposeful strides, ignoring everyone except Hayes. He stopped 3 feet from the chief, sat, and stared with absolute focus. The passive alert. The signal that something was fundamentally wrong. Hayes glanced down at Max dismissively. Even the dog knows you're unstable, Sarah. He's trying to protect you from yourself. No, Sarah said quietly. He's telling you what he told me 12 days ago, that you're dirty. She pulled out her phone, opened the video file she'd recorded in the evidence room, and played it on maximum volume. Hayes' voice filled the conference room. I've used recovered assets to fund operations that saved lives. I've leveraged relationships with criminals to stop worse criminals. The room erupted. Officers shouting questions, attorneys demanding the video be suppressed, FBI agents moving to secure the scene. Through the chaos, Sarah watched Hayes' mask finally crack. The smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. That video is inadmissible, his attorney shouted. Recorded without consent, obtained during an illegal search, obtained during a lawful investigation by a sworn officer documenting criminal activity, Martinez countered, and corroborated by Detective Brennan's testimony, financial records, and physical evidence recovered from Chief Hayes' personal storage unit. She clicked the remote again. New images appeared. Stacks of cash, drugs in evidence bags, weapons that should have been in lockup. We executed search warrants at 0600 this morning. Chief Hayes, you're under arrest. FBI agents moved forward. Hayes stood his ground, his expression transforming from fury to something colder, calculating. You're making a mistake, all of you. This department runs on relationships I've built over 28 years, on understandings that keep Atlanta safe. You tear that down, you'll watch this city burn. Then we'll rebuild from ashes that aren't contaminated with corruption, Sarah said. Hayes lunged, not toward the agents, towards Sarah. Crossing the conference room in 3 strides, hands reaching for her throat with murderous intent. FBI agents moved to intercept, but Max was faster. The Belgian Malinois hit Hayes at chest height, 80 pounds of trained aggression driving the chief backward into the wall. Max didn't bite, didn't injure. He held Hayes pinned with the perfect controlled force of a K-9 officer executing a takedown. Agents swarmed in, pulling Hayes away from the dog, forcing him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. He fought them, shouting threats and accusations, all pretense of dignity abandoned. Sarah knelt beside Max, running her hands over the dog's flanks, checking for injury. Good boy, such a good boy. Max's tail wagged once, then he returned to alert posture, watching as agents hauled Hayes to his feet and read him his rights. The chief's eyes found Sarah one final time, promising retribution, promising that this wasn't over. But it was. The moment Max had frozen at that surveillance van, Hayes' operation had been living on borrowed time. The arrests continued throughout the day. Detective Brennan was processed separately, his cooperation earning him reduced charges. Sergeant Morrison, Officer Kincaid, and Captain Delacroix were taken into custody at their homes, their shocked families watching as colleagues became criminals before their eyes. By evening, Sarah sat in Martinez's office, exhaustion making her bones feel hollow. Max slept on a blanket in the corner, finally allowing himself to rest after days of heightened vigilance. "The U.S. Attorney is offering you full immunity," Martinez said, sliding papers across her desk. "In exchange for your testimony at trial, you'll be the prosecution's key witness." "What about my career?" Martinez's expression was sympathetic but honest. "Atlanta PD won't fire you. They can't, legally. But working there after this, after you expose the chief and 4 senior officers, it's going to be difficult." "Difficult," Sarah laughed bitterly. "That's one word for it. You did the right thing. That matters." "Does it?" Sarah looked at Max, sleeping peacefully, trusting absolutely that she would keep him safe. "I destroyed my department. I made enemies of people I used to trust. I put myself and my partner in danger. And for what? Hayes will probably get 15 years, serve 8, and walk out into a comfortable retirement funded by money he hid in offshore accounts. Or he'll die in prison, despised by the same criminals he claimed to be controlling. And Atlanta PD will reform, clean house, and become the department it should have been all along." Martinez leaned forward. "Sarah, change is painful. It requires sacrifice. You made that sacrifice. Don't let Hayes's bitterness make you doubt what you accomplished." Sarah signed the immunity agreement and left the FBI office with Max at her side. They walked through downtown Atlanta as evening settled over the city, streetlights flickering to life, traffic flowing in its usual patterns. The city looked the same as always, vibrant, chaotic, alive, but Sarah knew it had changed, maybe not visibly, maybe not immediately, but fundamentally, because corruption had been exposed, because a good cop and her K-9 partner had refused to look away. 3 months later, Sarah returned to patrol duty. The locker room fell silent when she entered. Officers who'd been friendly suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. She dressed in her uniform under the weight of hostile stares, while Max waited patiently by her locker. Captain Williams approached, a transferred officer from Savannah brought in to rebuild Atlanta PD's command structure. "Lieutenant Collins, welcome back." "Thank you, sir. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. People resent what you did. They see you as a traitor who destroyed good cops' careers." Williams met her eyes. "But I've reviewed your record. I've watched the video. You did exactly what a good officer should do when confronted with corruption. You followed the evidence where it led, regardless of personal cost." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Not vindication exactly, but recognition. "What happens now?" "Now you do your job. You patrol your sector. You protect your city. And you prove to everyone watching that integrity matters more than loyalty to corruption. Williams smiled slightly. You've got the hardest beat in Atlanta, Collins, but you've also got the best partner in the department. Max's tail wagged at the compliment. Sarah took her first patrol shift in 3 months, driving through familiar streets with Max in his compartment. The radio crackled with routine calls, disturbances, traffic accidents, wellness checks, normal police work, the kind she'd signed up for 7 years ago. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Lieutenant Collins. This is Officer James Rodriguez from Vice. I saw what you did. I have information about other irregularities in the department. Can we talk? Sarah stared at the message, understanding its implication. Other officers watching Hayes's trial. Other cops with consciences who'd been too afraid to speak up until someone else showed it was possible. Other threads of corruption waiting to be pulled. She could ignore it, could focus on her own sector, keep her head down, rebuild her career quietly. No one would blame her. But Max shifted in his compartment, and Sarah remembered the moment he'd frozen at that white van. The absolute certainty in his posture that something was wrong. The trust that she would act on the information he provided. She typed back, "Tomorrow, coffee shop on Ponce. Bring documentation." Martinez had been right. Change required sacrifice, but it also required continuation, the willingness to keep fighting even when the first battle left you exhausted and wounded. Hayes's trial lasted 6 weeks. Sarah testified for 3 days, walking the jury through evidence, explaining Max's alerts, describing the theft she'd witnessed. Defense attorneys tried to break her, questioned her credibility, suggested she'd fabricated everything for career advancement. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video, Brennan's testimony, financial records, physical evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Hayes was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. No parole, no early release. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. You betrayed your oath, your department, and the citizens you swore to protect. Justice demands accountability. Sarah watched from the gallery as marshals led Hayes away. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge anyone, just walked toward his new future with the same calm certainty he'd shown in that conference room 3 months earlier. Except now, the certainty was false. Now he was just a criminal in handcuffs, stripped of authority and respect, facing decades behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Sarah. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her face. "Lieutenant Collins, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you have any statement?" Sarah looked down at Max, sitting calmly beside her despite the chaos. The dog who'd started everything by trusting his instincts, who'd remained loyal through danger and uncertainty, who'd never once doubted that they were doing the right thing. "I'm proud of my partner," Sarah said simply. "He's a good dog and a better cop than most humans. That's all I have to say." She walked away from the cameras, from the questions, from the moment that would define her career forever. Just a lieutenant and her K-9, heading back to their patrol unit to finish their shift. 6 months after Hayes's conviction, Sarah received a commendation from the FBI director. A ceremony in Washington, federal prosecutors praising her courage, photographs with officials she'd never meet again. Martinez attended, pulling Sarah aside afterward. "How are you doing? Really?" "Better." Sarah meant it. The department's changing, slowly, but Rodriguez's information led to 3 more arrests. Other officers are coming forward. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. "And you?" Sarah thought about that question. About nights when she still woke up remembering Hayes's hands reaching for her throat. About walking into the locker room and feeling hostile eyes on her back. About the officers who still wouldn't speak to her, who saw her as a traitor rather than a hero. But she also thought about the dealers who were actually going to prison now because evidence wasn't being stolen. about the corruption that was being rooted out slowly but systematically, about the city that was a little bit cleaner because she and Max had refused to look away. "I'm doing my job," Sarah said. "Same as always." Martinez smiled. "That's all any of us can do." Sarah returned to Atlanta that night, driving through the city with Max beside her. They passed the industrial district where the white van had been parked. The area looked different now. New development, old warehouses being converted to lofts, progress creeping into spaces that had been abandoned. Change, painful, necessary, inevitable. Sarah pulled into the parking lot at Piedmont Park, the same place where Martinez had first warned her about the corruption's depth. She let Max out, and they walked through the dog park together. Other K-9 officers nodded to her now, respect earned through sacrifice, acknowledged by those who understood what it cost. A young officer approached, maybe 25, with a German Shepherd puppy in training. "Lieutenant Collins, I'm Officer Sarah Chen. I just graduated from the academy. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing us that the job matters more than the brotherhood. That integrity isn't weakness." Chen knelt beside her puppy, adjusting his training harness. "I joined APD because of officers like you, because I believe we can be better than what we've been." Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not vindication, not pride, just hope. That maybe her sacrifice had meaning beyond the immediate, that maybe she'd help build something that would outlast her career. "Take care of your partner," Sarah said. "Trust his instincts. They'll keep you alive and honest." She walked back to her patrol unit with Max, leaving Chen and her puppy to their training. The city spread before them as evening settled in. 1,000,000 lights, 1,000,000 lives, 1,000,000 opportunities for both corruption and redemption. Sarah's radio crackled. "All units, we have a 1032 at Fulton Industrial Boulevard. Armed subjects, possible hostage situation. Unit 79er, respond." Fulton Industrial Boulevard, where this had all started, where Max had frozen at a white van and changed everything. Sarah keyed her radio. "Unit 79er responding." She flipped on the lights and headed toward the industrial district with Max alert in his compartment, toward danger, toward duty, toward the job she'd chosen 7 years ago and still believed in despite everything. The system had been corrupted, but systems could be cleaned. Buildings could be torn down and rebuilt stronger. Institutions could reform when people demanded better. Sarah had demanded better, had paid the price, had walked through fire and come out scarred but standing. And beside her, always beside her, was Max, the partner who'd never lied, never compromised, never stopped trusting that right would prevail if good people were willing to fight for it. They drove into the Atlanta night together, toward whatever came next, ready to face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together. The surveillance van was gone. Hayes was in prison. The corruption had been exposed and burned away. But the city remained. The job remained. The mission remained. And so did they, Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max, still protecting Atlanta, still doing right when it would be easier to look away, still proving that sometimes the system only works when people refuse to let it fail. Max barked once through his compartment window, seeing something in the approaching darkness that Sarah couldn't yet perceive. She accelerated, trusting his instincts completely. After everything they'd survived, after all they'd endured, that trust was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that had ever mattered. They disappeared into the industrial district, sirens wailing, lights flashing against warehouse walls. Just another call, just another shift, just another chance to do the right thing in a world that desperately needed people willing to try, and they would try, always together.